I want to tell the story of what happened to me when I went to see one of the countries, the US's world's most famous or well-known, well-regarded vulvovaginal specialists. And I've tried to make this short, and there's no way for me to make it short. If you haven't yet, please like and follow and like. It really means a lot to me. It really helps me. It's going to help me get my content seen, and it really gives me a reason to keep going and making these videos and telling my stories. So a lot of things were not done well with this vulvovaginal specialist, who some of the greatest names in the field have called the greatest of all time. And I've tried to talk about it. I feel really terrible because this person has done so much for the field in general. And before I saw him, I was so thankful for his research because it saved my life. In 2016, I found the research about how the birth control pill causes vulvodynia. I resonated with my life experience and my story, how it causes interstitial cystitis symptoms. I got off the pill. I couldn't find a doctor to let me try testosterone therapy, but I did find someone to let me try estrogen replacement, local vulvar estradiol. And I also went off Cymbalta and all my other prescription medications. And if you watch my other videos, Cymbalta actually has negative effects. It can on the bladder. It wasn't helping me with pain at all. So I got off my medications. I started estrogen replacement. And lo and behold, 5 years of abject misery and suffering and invasive procedures that didn't do anything. Like, my whole life turned around. I got so much better. And I started living a normal life. And I lived a normal life for several years, even though I still had provoked vestibulodynia and some degree of bladder symptoms. But if you've been in the thick of it with those symptoms, you know that it can be disabling, and like a 90% reduction in symptoms can be life-changing. So my life was changed. I went back to having a life again from 2016 to the year 2000. So in the spring of 2000, right when COVID hit, I got a yeast infection. I got a UTI. And I couldn't get in to see a doctor. They gave me the wrong antibiotics. It didn't work. I took my own antibiotics. It did work. I gave myself a yeast infection. They also would still not let me in to get a culture and swab, not that they were going to do that anyway. But they just said, here's some clotrimazole cream, use that. And so I did, and it came back. And for the next 4 months, I had constant chronic recurring yeast. I tried all kinds of crazy stuff, nothing worked. This also reminded me of how bad my vestibule was. If you've had yeast and you have vestibulodynia, it perniciously attacks that sensation, those tissues, and it's just so much worse. And so I was like, you know what, this is still really a problem in my life. I kind of recognized how it had been still hampering me with my dating life. Obviously, I actually was also low testosterone still. That also affected my self-esteem in romantic relationships. And I thought, you know what? No one in my insurance will see me. They are not letting patients go in for primary care and OBGYNs. They were only letting people come in for urgent care through my insurance. So even though I didn't have any money because I was unemployed, because COVID ruined a lot of stuff for a lot of people here where I live in the entertainment industry. Anyway, I'm talking too much. I decided it was time to go see this doctor whose research that I was amazed by, who really changed my life, and I was so excited. And that's where my problems began. So I went to see him for two main things: suspected hormonally mediated vestibulodynia that I think I had since I was at least in my early 20s, probably earlier because I was started on the pill when I was 15, and 4 months of my first time in my life ever having chronic recurring yeast. So I got blood work done because he asked me to, and here's thing number one. I went to Quest Diagnostics to fill the blood work order. And there were 16 different blood tests. I now know that for diagnosing hormonally mediated vestibulodynia, you really only need 3 or 4 blood tests, okay? But they're being comprehensive. However, this doctor doesn't accept insurance. So I was having to pay for all this kind of not necessary blood work out of pocket. Blood work that a lot of it was standard, and I could have just communicated, or this doctor could have communicated with doctors through my insurance, and I could have gotten it covered. And that's important because when I went to Quest Diagnostics to get this blood work, it was over $1,000 that they wanted me to pay, and I couldn't afford it. So I went home and I looked up how to order my own blood work at a site called Walk-In Labs, and that's what I did. And the doctor, I guess, thought that was pretty clever of me and funny, but I also think that they must get some money from the lab. I think I paid $400 or $300 for blood work that was quoted at $1,300. I went to the same lab. I went to Quest Diagnostics. The only difference is that I brought my own self-ordered blood work. And this doctor, the first time, I had brought his order. So where's all that extra money going? Anyway, that's minor, and it's thing one. Thing two, I had used clotrimazole the night before. I didn't know they were going to give me a vulvovaginal swab for yeast. I'd never had one before. And I had put clotrimazole in the night before. And so the nurse was going to swab me and said out loud, I can't tell what is yeast and what is cream. And the doctor said, like, do it anyway. Okay, no. It's really important to know if a person with chronic recurrent yeast actually has the yeast and what species it is. And if the nurse can't tell if she's even getting a proper sample, and you're going to charge me $300 that I don't even have for that, no, just do it another time, like scrap it. So that's not cool. That was thing two. That was crazy. The lab lost my test. And I called the office over the next weeks because I was very anxious to know like what kind of yeast I had, what was going on with my infection. And I paid money for it and they didn't have the test. And I'm like, this is insane. Like, I've worked through insurance, not paid for things out of pocket. They're much quicker. And I said, you know what? I would like a refund and to retake the test. It was like a month later. And they said no. This doctor said no. They said the lab will get it to us. I was like, well, I've been your patient for a month and I'm not getting the proper care. Like, I didn't fight that hard. I was thinking this. Anyway, that's when I received my results. Guess what was missing from the test? There were all these STDs. Why did I have to pay for that? I'd already been tested. Like, I didn't have any STDs. That was one thing that the urgent care was able to do. But the yeast test, there was just no response. It didn't say negative. It didn't say what they tested for. It was just nothing. I was like, this is the one thing I thought I was paying for. And I told the office and they're like, well, the lab said everything was negative. I'm like, I paid for this test. I paid for this one test. I want to see that the lab is saying it's negative. And so a week later, they emailed me another copy of the same thing, and it looked like they had like just put an X there to be like, it's negative. And a month later after that, I was still having chronic yeast. The doctor did a wet mount, so they took a sample and looked at it right there in the office under the microscope. He was kind enough to show me under the microscope what the yeast looked like. Like, you could see yeast. I definitely still had yeast. It was the same yeast. You could see what's called the flagellae of the yeast. He pointed it out to me. He's a great guy. This doctor just really effed up with my case over and over again. And it's just horrible that I have to just tell this story, because I love a doctor that's like, hey, let's go look at your sample under the microscope together and I'll show you what the yeast is. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. And it's just so awful what the rest of my story. After all that, they didn't give me another vaginal swab. This is thing three. The doctor kept prescribing me the same antifungals that I had already been taking. So when I got to his office, I had already been taking diflucan for 4 months and it hadn't been working. And he kept prescribing me diflucan. He also prescribed me boric acid. This is thing four. He sent me a prescription of compounded boric acid that I had to pay $2 per capsule for at the compounding pharmacy. I later discovered that boric acid is over the counter, probably thanks to wonderful people on social media advocating for Vulvodynia issues. And, it's like 10 cents a capsule on Amazon or at CVS. Why didn't he tell me that? Why doesn't he care about people's like life savings getting drained by basic female health care? Like, I was paying like $40 for a few days of boric acid. And anyway, so the boric acid and the diflucan were not effective. So in total, I suffered for almost a year with this yeast infection. And I didn't get a proper diagnosis name for it, which was Candida parapsilosis. So it's a rare yeast, not Candida albicans, until a year after I first started suffering from it. I didn't get proper treatment until a couple months before that, when I demanded this doctor, and I'd been under his care for 6 months at this point, paying hundreds and thousands of dollars for his medical expertise. And I'm the one that had to look up if there were kinds of yeast that didn't respond to diflucan, which I learned was an azole antifungal, like clotrimazole, miconazole. Diflucan is fluconazole. So there's this class of antifungals that some yeasts don't They don't work on them. And I clearly had one. And even if we didn't have the speciation from the vaginal swab, I'm pretty sure you could assume when a patient tells you they've been taking diflucan for 4 months and it hasn't worked, that you need to try a different antifungal. And the boric acid wasn't effective either. I don't know why, but I know that eventually the yeast was so bad it actually spread out into my vulva, into under my clitoral hood. It was just a freaking nightmare, caused all kinds of problems for me, probably worsened some of the other issues I had going on. Anyway, the good news for people watching who maybe this is resonating with is that after several months of oral nystatin, which I had to beg for and figure out that I needed, I got better, and I've been better ever since. So if you have microbiome problems, take heart. Like, you just need to keep digging. There's answers out there. I'm gonna make more videos about the other microbiome issues that I've had. Okay, next.